Greetings, brothers and sisters. So I wanted to, I went and looked at the comments to my video about this channel, the Pockets of the Future channel, and being on a hiatus status, and I got all these various comments which I thought I covered in the video, and so I wanted to give it another try in terms of what's going on with this channel and my backup channel. So the first thing is all my videos that are private, I'm going to go through them. Some of them should be deleted. They just are unnecessary videos. They were time-sensitive videos. Once in a while I cover a current event or issue, and unless the event or issue is going to come back around, the video just sits there and there's just no reason for it to be there. But most of the videos that are privatized on this channel, I will unprivatize them sometime in the next couple of weeks or a month or so. I'll start doing that. It's sort of a laborious process, but those videos will be made public again. It's one of the reasons, the most important reason to preserve the channel, because I'm never going to upload all those videos again. There's just too many of them, and I can't remember, I just can't remember them. I can't remember which videos might be more important and more substantial and whatever it is. People have videos that they watch multiple times and want to be able to come back and listen to those videos, some of the longer videos and things, and the comedic videos, the ones that are funny videos or whatever. People like to listen to those videos over and over again, and so people have some of their favorites up there. Eventually, those will all be made public again. I mean, for the most part. And I'll explain why I am doing this in a couple of weeks or so. I'll explain why, all this stuff happened and why this was the best strategy to preserve the channel. Again, it has thousands of videos on it that I'm not going to re-upload. And so, for the next couple of weeks, I won't be posting much on this channel, even though I can now, even though the suspension or whatever they call it has been lifted. And so for the next few weeks or so, I'm going to post on my backup channel, and I might post on there from time to time, like exclusive content there to keep it going. There's a growing subscriber list, and I think it's good to have a good backup channel there, and I'll talk about that more. But you can go to the backup channel. Again, in every one of my videos, there is a link in the description box below the video, so you can go to my backup channel, the Paul Romano channel, as it's called. And if there's any issues with this channel again, then you can just go to the backup channel, or you can follow me on Facebook or Instagram or any of these other things. Twitter, I guess, at some point. I don't really do much on Twitter, but I could always post a link on Twitter. I still have a Twitter account. I just never use it. But those things are all linked in the description box. And those are the things I use. I have a Facebook page I post my videos on. Occasionally, I post something on Instagram, but mostly it's just for people to message me and things. Instagram is, I guess, considered the worst in terms of invasion of people's privacy, and really it's something I can't post my videos on, so it's not really, doesn't suit my needs or whatever. But the Facebook page, the Pockets of the Future Facebook page, you can follow me and I'll post links there. But the most important thing is to go on my backup channel and subscribe to that, and you can just look in there from time to time. If I don't post stuff on my regular channel, this channel, then you can go to that channel and find out if there's something going on with my channel. Every time you get a community guideline strike, they suspend you for at least a week or 2 weeks, a week for the first one and 2 weeks for the second one, and your channel's gone with the third one. I posted a video, at least one video up on the backup channel over the past couple of weeks, and so you can find new content there. And like I said, for the next couple of weeks, I'll be posting most of my videos on that channel. I'll explain that in more detail in the next couple of weeks or something like this. And so like I said in my other video, I'm taking a break in the sense that I don't feel obligated to make a video. And so for the past 4 years, I felt like I had to make at least one video every day. And then something would happen in the world. There's a number of current events and issues that I would have normally made videos on, and for various reasons, I haven't. But it's nice to just not care. I've tried to make at least one video every day for the past so many years, 4 or 5 years. And there's been times I've been traveling, or when I got COVID, I missed a day or two. And then, once in a while I get a really bad migraine, and so I'm not able to post anything. but I haven't had an extended time where I don't feel pressure to post something. Like somebody will send me a breaking story. And it's just, to keep the channel going. And, it's just something that I felt the need to do because it's a job for me and it's just something I have to do. And to not feel that way, right? To not, oh yeah, I don't have to care about this. I don't, people send me links to things that I'm not personally interested in. And if I'm not going to make a video, I'm not going to watch them. And that's been nice to have that. And that's going to continue for at least a couple of weeks. And I feel, it's just good to get away from the grind. And whenever you have any sort of employment, any job, any work you're doing, it can get, turn into a grind and things like this. So I'm glad to take a break from that. But I will be posting things on my backup channel, maybe one video every day or not, but there'll be some content. I want to keep going. It's not like, making one video a day is not really taxing or anything like that. So I'm taking, a break for a while. Maybe the next month or two, you'll see less content from my channel, but then, things might change or whatever. Events might change. And so I, just wanted to talk a little bit, not so much about the election today, but the two categories, or the categories that society defines you with. Because people in the truth community are supposed to be looking beyond the official story, beyond the controlling system, beyond our cultural and societal structure. And there is the Democrats and the Republicans, and that's the categories that they have given you. They have given you these two categories. They've given you a binary choice, the left and the right, liberal or conservative, and then there's these other sort of binary choices that you have in our society. And you have to recognize that those are their categories, that you have been programmed your whole life to think that you have to make a decision and you have to pick one or the other. That one represents good and one represents evil. One represents God, one represents the devil, or whatever it might be. For the right-wing people, it'd be that the Republicans represent God and the Democrats represent Satan. But for the Democrats, they think the Democrats represent science and the Republicans represent superstition, illogical superstition. I mean, this is the viewpoint that you see from the people in the various categories, the categories that they have chosen for you. And that's why I say, it's good to be light about all of these things. When you look at the times in your life that you've been really upset about something, really triggered, and maybe it's caused a fight or rift with people in your family, it's caused a, whatever situation where you lash out and you get angry and you say things that you will regret later, possibly, and you hurt somebody's feelings and they say things back to you and it devolves into a, nasty fight, even something where it breaks a relationship or something. And then, a year or two later, you don't care about that issue. Or it could be a political issue, something that was so dire, something that was so, horrible, right? Something that you thought was so evil it has to be stopped, right? The way that people thought about, the left thought about Trump being president and how he got reelected, it would destroy the world. And then people on the right thinking that if Trump loses and Biden becomes president, then he would ruin the world. And that's how people think about these things. But then it's another issue 2 weeks later. Like that goes away, or maybe a year later, they all have a shelf life is what I'm saying. That there are these issues that come and go, and you think it's so bad, so horrible, but then it, doesn't really affect you at all. Like maybe you have a real strong emotional reaction to the issue when it's in real time, when it's happening concurrently, but in a few weeks or a month or a year, you forget all about it. Maybe you don't even remember it after a while, but you're so worked up and upset about it, so fearful about it, so stressed about it. I mean, this is one of the beautiful aspects of the heartfulness meditation. It allows people to big picture things in terms of miseries and difficulties being a blessing so that you can go further along your spiritual path, and that everything that's happening is part of a divine plan, even though human beings have some free will and some freedom of choice, and we could choose the wrong thing, we could make the wrong decisions. Eventually, that's part of the plan as well. It becomes part of the plan, even though we are choosing things that are outside of godly control in a sense. We have our own sovereign spirit where we make decisions And when oftentimes we make the wrong decision, we have one right decision, which is to adhere to our spiritual path and our soul's path and God's plan. But oftentimes human beings don't do that. But even in that, God has, corrective measures and has ways of bringing everyone back into the fold eventually. There's no escaping the divine will. Even though there's freedom of choice, divine will always wins in the end, in a sense, because it is unavoidable. It's inevitable. Because everything goes back to the source eventually. It's unavoidable. The universes which are expanding now eventually will contract, right? We're in an expansion phase, but eventually the universe contracts back within itself and returns to the source. The physical universes and all these etheric universes and things that are out there. So everything goes back to God and starts over again. And so when you think about it in those terms, right, things aren't so dire right now, especially since the system has to come down eventually. It's just sucky for us. I say this over and over again because we're dependent on it. We can't imagine living without the system because it's all we know. And that's how life is for human beings, that we're creatures of habit and creatures of addiction and things. And unfortunately, we avoid change even though change is inevitable. And so there are things in this world that we can't imagine losing, people and systems and comforts and pleasures and things. I mean, people have medications they take, or, even something like coffee, or watching sports or a TV show, or, going on Facebook or watching YouTube videos or whatever it is, right? People have things that they do on a daily basis, and they need those things. They need to look forward to those things. It helps to stabilize them. Your morning cup of coffee, or, foods you might be addicted to, or, just depend on, or people in your life. And if you just think about losing those things, all of them. I mean, think about losing all of them, never mind just one or two of them. And there's just a complete freak out, right? You have almost a panic attack thinking about losing those things. There are things that you might say to yourself, I got to have at least this. I can't go on if I don't have this, right? I can't live without that for any extended period of time. And then you think about losing everything in the system and having to reinvent yourself. I mean, this happened to me in a smaller way in 2014 and 15, where, my life's plan and goals and the relationship I was in, the marital relationship I was in, and all these things that were tied to that, right? These life goals that just collapsed. My family having to reinvent all of it, it was a shock to my system, but everything turned out much better. And the cleaning I went through, and, the heartfulness system helping me get through it in terms of the, transmission, the cleaning, it ended up being a complete blessing. But when you work for something, when you create, goals, life goals, and those goals turn out to go in the opposite direction, some level of failure or whatever it is to achieve those goals, and, being tied to my belief, my faith that I was following God's path, which I was, I still believe I was, but then having it go south like that. So all of it, it was a complete bummer in the beginning, and it ended up being something that I'm completely grateful for in the end. People can change and adapt and reinvent themselves and reinvent their lives in compliance and coordination and coherence with the godly forces and things. And when you do that, it's just something that usually turns out much better, not just in terms of your life, but how you feel as a person, how you feel inside about everything, all the changes, your old life, your new life, and all these things. Because if you change internally and you get closer to God, it changes your whole perspective. And that can happen collectively to the people in the world when they realize this old system was weighing them down spiritually in so many other ways. So when it collapses, there's lots of people that will find it to be a complete blessing. Lots of people won't, right? But really, that's the task here. And this is something that everyone has to learn to do, whether the system collapses as a whole or just collapses for you. I mean, people have their own personal apocalypse. Their family dies in a car crash, or somebody gets cancer, or they lose their job, and or their country gets invaded. I mean, it can happen on a smaller scale or a global scale. It can happen to an individual, a family, a city, a country, where, a hurricane hits and a couple states get wiped out and some people's lives are changed forever. And it gets them out of their rut. And, they were doing the same things their whole lives. Now, all of a sudden, that's washed away. You see this with animals. Animals don't have permanent homes. You understand this? Animals roam around and, something happens to their old home. There's a forest fire or a bigger animal comes and kicks them out. They might have a nice cozy home somewhere in a tree, some hole in a tree. There'll be a bird or squirrel in there, and some predator will come along or something, or some bigger, version, another squirrel that's bigger than them comes and bullies them out of there, or whatever it is. And this happens throughout the natural world. Animals just move somewhere else. They build a new nest or whatever it is, right? Sometimes the weather's harsh. They're stuck out in a rainstorm or something. Some of the animals won't make it and things like this. That's just how nature is. There's really bad days. Like, everyone has really bad days in their life. But some of those things that you go through, those really bad things, the defining moments of your life, these, tumultuous, difficult challenges you go through, often are what define you and make you into a good person and cultivate your character qualities and deepen your relationship with God and all these things. There's this great story. The second and third masters of the heartfulness system, Babaji, the second master of the system, was training his representative, Master Charji, right, his disciple, to take over for him, to be his successor. And Charji was, often traveling from southern India up to Shahjahanpur, where Babaji lived, or they were traveling together around India, and they traveled together to Europe and America a couple of times in 1972, I believe, and then 1974. And the 1974 one, that story is the one I want to talk about. It is advised that you keep a diary in the, heartfulness system, and Master Charji kept a very meticulous set of diaries, and they eventually became published in a series of books called In His Footsteps. And so he kept, extensive account of these trips. In the 1974 trip, they were heading to various countries in Europe. They went to England, I think France and Denmark, and maybe like Switzerland, maybe a couple of other countries, I'm not sure. And then they flew over to America. And before the trip, Babaji was 74, 75 years old. So he was, and again, this was in rural India where he was already way past the life expectancy there. And so he was an older person, and he had a lot of physical issues. He had an ulcer and some other lingering health issues. He just barely ever ate. And he enjoyed this hookah. I've talked about this before. He would sit with his hookah, and everyone would be sitting around him, and he'd be cleaning and transmitting to everybody and making jokes. And it was just this something that people who were able to experience this, Babaji would be sitting there enjoying his hookah. The hookah was packed with charcoal and tobacco and jaggery. Jaggery is this sort of brown raw sugar that comes in these, these chunks. You can see it if you go to an Indian market. And even though he was somebody who wasn't attached to material life, he didn't eat much, and he was just focused on the spiritual so much. He really enjoyed smoking the hookah, and it seemed to be something that kept him grounded and attached to the physical world. And so they were about to embark on this epic trip, a trip which included, they were sitting together, Babaji and Master Charji were sitting together at the Denmark airport in Copenhagen, a place that Babaji really just loved. He loved the Danish people. And he gave a sitting, in the heartfulness system, you have these things called sittings, group sittings, and individual sittings. Individual sittings involve a preceptor, the master of the system, sitting across from the person receiving the sitting, and the master of the system would read the condition and clean the heart and the spiritual points of any spiritual grossness that was there to be cleaned, and then transmit this divine energy, the utilization of the divine energy for the transformation of man. And so they were sitting together at this airport, and Babaji said to Charji, I want to give you a sitting. And usually the sittings last for about a half hour, 20 minutes. Sometimes they're a little bit longer, but usually under a half hour. But this one lasted, I believe, 1 minute and 50 seconds, something that was really short. And Charji reported in his diary that he felt that this was, an indescribable feeling that he had. And then after the sitting, Babaji said, what did you experience? And Charji told him, and Babaji said, I just transmitted my own condition to you, which meant he transmitted his spiritual essence into Master Charji, and he became his spiritual representative, which is something, might not mean anything to you as a person listening to this who's not, interested in the heartfulness system, or you've tried it and started it or something. But for me, I think about it all the time. Like, I've reread this book probably like 3 times, but it's something I think about because it's unique to the heartfulness practice where the essence of the master is passed on, his spiritual essence, his spiritual accomplishments, but also, part of himself is passed on to his representative in these meditative sittings. And that person now has that spiritual essence inside of him. And it's going to manifest different for him. All 4 of the masters of the system are different people. But having this essence passed on from one to the other keeps the system being a living system. In most religious traditions, spiritual traditions, there is a saint, a higher developed soul, a spiritual master, whoever it is. And they come down and they create a movement, and they're not able to pass on the essence, their personal essence, into a disciple. And so their movement then becomes a religion. It's a spiritual movement when they're alive, and then when they pass, they leave behind some teachings, some books, and some things. But the spiritual flame, right, the spiritual essence they're not able to pass it on. But this heartfulness system. So anyways, this epic event happened. Doctors recommended that Babaji didn't travel on this trip. And so, it was one of those situations where this trip needed to happen for a variety of reasons, and the most important one was this sitting. But in terms of his physical health, it wasn't good for Babaji. People said he was really never the same physically. He just had real poor health, and, he lost his vitality after this trip. And Master Charji documented, all of these things that were happening to cause Babaji to feel discomfort because, when somebody's older, just plane travel and travel in general is difficult on them. You just don't have the ability to adapt and recover. Your body doesn't have the inner strength and fortitude to endure all the difficulties of traveling and all the various, new germs and new diseases and, the spiritual condition for somebody like this. Plus Babaji was cleaning and transmitting and preparing people spiritually, which takes a lot of life's energy. It takes a lot of, a person's creative force. And Babaji just wouldn't eat. Like, he just couldn't find anything. He was a vegetarian, and he was in Europe, and he couldn't find foods that appealed to him. And so he was just breaking down physically. And each day, Charji's writing in his diary, and he's like completely stressed out, and he's flipping out over Babaji's health. He's completely worried and stressed out about it, right? And he keeps on saying over and over again that Babaji's just sustaining himself by smoking his hookah. Like, it's the only thing, in the physical world that's keeping him going on this trip. Like, he's not eating, and he's not sleeping so well, and he's got all these physical issues. It keeps on getting worse, and he's, documenting this day after day in his diary, and they published it in these books called In His Footsteps. And it's, when you're reading it, you're, like, I knew what happened. like I already know the outcome, even after reading the book a couple of times and knowing all the, timeline of the events and all these things, that Babaji wouldn't pass away till 1983, and it was 1974, so it was 9 years before his, passing. But still, it's this stressful event. And then there's this moment, this is the reason I'm telling this story, and they're traveling from like Denmark to Sweden, I'm not sure where, and the customs officials take Babaji's hookah, and Master Charji has to tell him, right? And he's like writing, he's flipping out because, this whole trip, Babaji is barely hanging on physically. It's one of those situations where somebody's so frail and so sick that anything can put them over the edge. And, he's just sustaining himself smoking this hookah. And Master Charji's like so stressed that he's got to tell him that they're going to be in, this country for like 2 or 3 days. And he just can't imagine Babaji making it through those days without his hookah. So finally he says, they're in the airport or something. He goes, Babaji, they took your hookah. And Babaji, nothing. Charji said there's just no reaction. Like, he's like, okay, He doesn't have any like negativity or no freak out, no stress, no, disappointment or anger or any of these things. He just, all right. You know, it's this wonderful, it's a very subtle story. I mean, I think about, like I said, I think about that all the time. It's just a wonderful story of a spiritual being able to detach themselves from even their physical needs. I mean, he had a physical need to really not travel at all. And so all of it, right? But it was something that had to happen where he had to make this physical sacrifice because, again, his health and vitality were never really the same, but was necessary for him to make this trip. A lot of big things came out of this trip in all these countries, in Europe and America, and the movement of the heartfulness system, the Sajmark system, the growth of the system in these areas. And then, of course, this epic sitting that happened where Master Babaji passed his condition on to Master Charji so that there would be this, the system would keep on going, right? And this happened with Master Charji and Daji Kamlesh Patel. There has to be a living representative in the system or it becomes a religion. As soon as there's no living representative, there's no living essence in the system, then the heartfulness system becomes a religion, which is something, which would be a complete bummer. I mean, it would change everything. So anyways, there was these, books. I've talked about these books before, the Whispers from the Bridal World books. And there was these, channeled messages where Babaji from what is called the Bridal World in the heartfulness system gave these messages to this French woman. There's like 20,000 messages. This woman, I've talked about her before. She was somebody who was sick in her own right. She had an accident when she was a young person. She fell off a horse and her back was, like broken in some way and had a bad operation. So she was in physical pain most of her life, but she was this gifted medium and a practitioner of the heartfulness method. And Babaji came to her as well as other higher developed spiritual beings, but mostly Babaji. And she took down, I think, 20,000, 30,000 of these messages. It's, something that's like the first time there's been this much written material of this kind. And in some of the messages, there's a small segment, about 10 to 12 messages that are called prophecies. And there's, within a lot of the other messages, there is, talked about electromagnetic poisoning from the, Wi-Fi and all the things that are going on the planet. So there's other things in the messages, these, tens of thousands of messages, but there are these specific group which are called prophecies. And the woman taking them down just didn't understand a lot of these things. I mean, she wasn't certainly a truther. And this was way back in 2001 when she took down these specific messages. So she was freaking out by what he was saying to her. And so I read these messages to my wife. My wife had been stressed out about some of the things going on in the world. And it actually, having this idea that it was part of a bigger plan, because he talks about things that are going to happen, hundreds of years from now in terms of earthly changes and the tectonic plates moving and, this, the issue with the atomic bomb. He called it, atomic energy demonic, and that it would, ruin this world to some extent or whatever it is that he said. But there was this one paragraph which I remembered it once I was reading it to her, summed up the, this is the positive way to look at all these things. And Babaji ends the first prophecy when he starts giving her these messages, and he says, "These prophecies do not concern you. You are undergoing the damaging effects of this insidious pollution, which will lead the world to collapsing, but you can neither stop time nor modify the system in place. Then protect yourself as well as possible from these harmful effects and pray for your brothers of the future." And in reading this again, I must have read these things maybe, 10 to 15 times. I mean, they have some, out of this world predictions and some of the things that are in there. But I think the most important line in terms of looking at this is that you can either stop time or modify the system that's in place. And that's this beastly system I talk about here quite often. And I have, seen this in my own life and my own experience, that the system can't be modified. And that's something that everybody stresses and struggles with that comes into the truth community. People thinking that you can somehow overtake the people that control the system and you can make the system good, and you can't do that with this system, right? I mean, I say it over and over again. You can't modify the system that's in place. It's just a beautiful way of putting it. There's no way of modifying the system and making it good or making it divine. That's like trying to modify a Twinkie by throwing a whole bunch of organic vegetables on it, right? You can't make the Twinkie healthy. You can stick a bunch of organic peas and organic cilantro and whatever it is. And yeah, maybe it's a little bit more healthy than it was, but maybe it's even worse because now you have all this, you're just mixing all these different ingredients. And so you can't modify the system. The system is what it is. And it can't be made divine. It can't be made better or, appropriate. It can't be made sustainable. No matter what the controllers want to do, no matter what you want to do, the system has to go. It has to collapse. That's just the way it is. So what you do is you protect yourself as best as possible, and you pray for future generations of human beings, right? You protect yourself as best as possible from the harmful effects of the pollution that he's talking about, which is electromagnetic pollution and all of it. Everything that we experience, the cultural pollution, and all the negativity that's out there in the world. You protect yourself, you protect your family, you do your best to get through all this, and that's, and that's good. That's noteworthy. That's something that should happen. You have information that other people don't want to face up to. You have information that other people aren't dealing with, and so you accept the world. You see what you're seeing. You see how the system's going. You see that it's collapsing. It's the apocalypse or whatever you want to call it, right? The system's coming to an end, and it is going, out in a bad way, right? It's not going out in a healthy way, an organic way. It's getting more and more toxic. It's getting more and more demonic. It's getting worse and worse. And so what do? Well, you can't stop time. You can't, prevent the system from happening. You can't stop the changes from occurring, right? You can't do that. I mean, you'd like to. We'd all like to. Everyone wants to do that to some extent. And we want to just, we don't want to give up all of our stuff, our lifestyle, all these things that we're used to, things that we are attached to. I mean, that's the hookah story, right? I mean, he just wasn't attached to the hookah like Master Charge he thought he was, right? He needed the hookah, he enjoyed the hookah, but he wasn't attached to it. And that's something that everyone has to learn on the spiritual path, detachment, right? Even though there's so many great things about this system, things that are, would make us freak out if we think about losing them, we just have to, accept and be grateful for this time period, that maybe we'll even be better off on the other side of this thing. So you can't stop time. You can't modify the system in place. And so what do? Well, you prepare. You prepare the best you can to ride the roller coaster through this thing, and you prepare your children. You do your best. I mean, this is the idea behind Pockets of the Future. You start living now the way that people have to live in the future. So you start training yourself and developing yourself and, being a person that would thrive on the other side of this collapse. And that's something that you're given this inside information. And so what are you going to do with it? Are you going to, try to pick some artificial side in this binary paradigm that you've been given? A Democrat or Republican, say, yeah, if we stick with these guys, they'll save us. I mean, that's what people think on both sides. Both the Democrats and the Republicans, people who are, voting for one side or the other, think Trump's going to save them, or they think Biden's going to save them. They think the system can be changed and, can be made great again, or Biden can save the soul of this country, all these campaign slogans. But it's not true. It's not true. The system cannot be saved. It can't be modified. It is what it is, and it is, like anything else, it's ending poorly. And we're caught on the cusp of that. We're caught in the cusp of this transition. And the heartfulness system of meditation, this system that's given at this specific time, these higher developed souls came down at this specific time to help people, navigate through this transition and start building something that's more in line with the divine laws and the divine consciousness, and a system that's going to, God will be brought in, people's internal relationship with God, not some externalized religious relationship with God, but people's internalized relationship with God, bringing God in as a partner to build a system that is, more sustainable and more in line with God's laws and, all these things, right? And so this is why only spirituality will save this world. It's Paul Romano definitely pointing from the Apocalypse and the Ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.